Major funding for Marcia Adams Heartland Cooking is provided by Maple Leaf Farms, a symbol for ducklings and frozen entrees, chef quality you can count on. By Souder Woodworking, America's furniture craftsman. With more than 50 years' experience, Souder provides ready-to-assemble furniture for today's home and office. By Marilat Industries, America's cabinet maker, committed to quality in a variety of kitchen and bath cabinetry styles.
Hello there, and welcome to Heartland Cooking. Today we're doing Swedish recipes, and they're going to be a real treat. Swedish communities exist in several of the Heartland states, including Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Illinois. We know just a few of their foods because most of their cooking is done in their kitchens rather than in Swedish restaurants. One reason for this is because originally most Swedish people chose to live in rural areas. We're going to make 4 distinctive recipes today: meatballs, rice pudding, wonderful corn fritters, and Janson's Temptation, a very original potato dish. Before we begin with the Swedish meatballs, however, let's visit a Swedish community, which is hardly rural, by the way. It's in Chicago, Illinois. This ethnic neighborhood is called Andersonville, and it's the area where many immigrants from Sweden settled when they first started arriving here in the 1840s. At one time, there were more Swedes in Andersonville than in Stockholm.
The view of the Chicago skyline always makes my heart leap up. The city is located on the shores of Lake Michigan. Some people think it looks like Rio de Janeiro. It's noted for its fine contemporary architecture, buildings designed by Mies van der Rohe, Sullivan, and Frank Lloyd Wright. Symbols of the city include the elevated commuter trains, nicknamed the L, the lions at the Chicago Art Institute, as well as the clock at Marshall Field's department store, where you buy delicious Frango mints that we're going to use in another show. Another charm of the city is its ethnic neighborhoods, Italian, Greek, Mexican, and one of the largest is the Swedish neighborhood of Andersonville on North Clark Street. The center of activity in Andersonville is Wickstrom's Gourmet Delicatessen, where the entire neighborhood comes in to shop, as well as drink coffee and catch up on the neighborhood news. The day we were there, I chatted with the neighborhood priest, and a group of Scandinavian tourists had dropped in, hungry for their own food, as well as gossip from home. The owner, Mr. Wickstrom, who is just sitting down to join us, and he says the coffee pot is always on, is a strong believer in keeping Scandinavian traditions alive and has been very active in the community. Here, you're even able to read the American Swedish newspaper, printed in Swedish, with information from the old country as well as Chicago. It even has recipes. The shop's impressive, for people come in from all over the Midwest to buy special ingredients needed to prepare Scandinavian dishes. Mr. Wickstrom showed us about, and we talked about some favorite Swedish dishes.
Over here we have a very famous Swedish yellow peas, which you make ärtsoppa, the Swedish pea soup. And also naturally, to this belongs the brown beans, the Swedish brown beans, bruna bönor, that are cooked with cinnamon and sugar and made sweet and sour with a little bit of vinegar, and a delight, especially around Christmas time.
Wonderful, wonderful.
And also, not to forget, we have the Swedish lutfisk, which also is the Norwegians and the Danes lutfisk. That's especially prepared in an oven, or you can also cook it right in water with a nice sauce made with mustard flavor or just plain melted butter. We cannot forget the famous pickled herring, which is pickled with onions and vinegar and sugar and made sweet and sour. It's a delight for the Swedes, especially around Christmas time. And naturally, here are the famous Swedish meatballs, which are a delight. I experimented with the recipe for many years.
I have one in my cookbook. I'm going to compare mine against yours.
Thank you.
And what's this?
This is to top up everything, the dessert rice pudding, made with a flair.
May I have a little bit?
Yes.
And
sure, please help yourself.
And, oh, it looks like a really fine one. And then you have, I see lingonberries, so I assume that goes on the top.
The rice pudding belongs to the lingonberries, the cooked Swedish lingonberries, or also the fresh frozen lingonberries, which is a delight.
Great. These look like cranberries.
They taste a little bit like cranberries too. They are tart in flavor.
All of the food at Wickstrom's was absolutely delicious. The meatballs were especially good. And although this recipe of meatballs isn't Mr. Wickstrom's, you know, that sort of classified information, it's still a very good recipe. In a large bowl, you should have 1 beaten egg, and then to that add 1/2 cup of mashed potatoes. And you'll find mashed potatoes in most meatball recipes. These were then going to combine with the 1 egg and 1/2 cup of breadcrumbs and 3 tablespoons of onion. And just mix that all together rather quickly. And then the spices are very nice, and I'm going to read them aloud to you. And there's a list, so get out your pencil and paper. We have 1/2 teaspoon of brown sugar, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1/2 teaspoon of pepper, 3/4 teaspoon allspice and nutmeg, and 1/4 teaspoon each of ground cloves and ginger. And mix that all in too. The traditional meat used in Swedish meatballs is always beef and pork. And the combination I'm using today would be 1 pound of ground round and 1/4 pound of ground pork. Now, another secret of a real authentic Swedish meatball is that the meat should be pulsed so often that it is smooth and silky. You want it very, very fine, much finer than the butcher can do it for you. Now, I'm going to use my hands just because it's quicker. You good cookers all know that, of course. And then mix this all together thoroughly. I thought one of the touching things about the Wickstrom Deli was the fellowship that was going on there. I could see that if I lived in Chicago, I would probably go to that grocery regularly just for the conversation, if not to buy the gourmet foods. I'll review what went into this as far as the meat goes. It was 1 pound of ground round and 1/2 pound of pork. You could vary that a little bit if you wanted to. Then form these into what we call walnut-sized balls here in the Midwest. And, or would you say these are big marbles, perhaps? And what I want you to do next then is to roll them in a mixture of 1 beaten egg and 1 1/2 cup of crumbs, because you're going to give these a lovely coating that way. And then put this in the 1 1/2 cup of crumbs. There. The crumbs really will work for you better if they're dried out. By that I mean make the crumbs a day or so before and let them sit on your kitchen counter. Now make all those up, and then you're going to want to saute them in a skillet, a 10-inch skillet, preferably. I like to use the electric skillet. And we're going to actually make a fried meatball at this point, but they won't be totally cooked. We'll finish those up a little later. Oh, and here we have some meatballs waiting for me that are already cooked. So see how nice and brown they are? Cook them slowly in 3 tablespoons of butter. And then we're going to make the sauce. And to the skillet, I want you to add 2 tablespoons of flour, 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt, 1/4 of a teaspoon of nutmeg. And we're going to make a roux. Now we're going to turn this up. Now it's very important when you are making a roux or making a gravy that this flour bubbles up, because if it doesn't, the protein in the flour will not expand and thicken your sauce. So again, this is one of those steps that you really want to watch and do it thoroughly to make sure it bubbles up. I just hate making recipes and not having them turn out right. It's so disconcerting, and it's such a waste of time. Now, this is bubbling up pretty good. What's really great about these ethnic delis in the Chicago area is that the grocery stores become a meeting place. And at Wickstrom's on North Clark Street, everybody comes. Every day, Scandinavians and others come in to chat and have coffee and talk about food. And certainly, it's hard to say which is more important, the conversation or the food. A grocery like that is truly a wonderful thing because it enables the ethnic community to hang on to their social and food customs. And those two things are very necessary and rather interchangeable. Now we're ready to add to this 1 cup of broth. going to be very, very good. I will also tell you it's probably going to be a little thin at this point, and then we're going to add 1 cup of half and half. Isn't this ending up nicely? And a lovely dash of hot red pepper sauce. And stir this, turn up the heat, and it's going to thicken a bit, but not too much, because I'm going to add the meatballs back to this sauce. And the flour that was on the outside of these meatballs is going to continue thickening this sauce. So here we go. Meatballs back to the sauce. And cover and cook 10 minutes. And after they've cooked for 10 minutes, at this point, the gravy will thicken. Now, you may, of course, I would say, freeze the meatballs after they've cooked at this point, if you can wait that long, or you can serve them immediately. Certainly, they are, of all things, a very captivatingly spiced and attractive dish. This next recipe is Scandinavian corn fritters from the Bishop Hill Heritage Cookbook. Now, you may very well ask yourself, who or what is Bishop Hill? Well, Bishop Hill is a small town of 166 persons, at least at the last census, located in central Illinois. And I'll tell you more about Bishop Hill later on. But let's get back to these corn fritters. They are very delicate and cake-like, and this is an old recipe that rounds out a meal with real dash. In the bowl, I'm going to beat 2 eggs and add 1/4 cup of milk and 1/4 cup of water and a tablespoon of melted butter, and then combine all of that quickly and stir in a 1-pound can of drained corn, just off the grocery shelf. There it goes. And then we're going to add the dry ingredients, 2 cups of all-purpose flour, and 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 3/4 teaspoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of pepper, and a tablespoon of sugar for sweetening. Now add that as well. And stir by hand. Do not use an electric mixer for this step, because what happens is that you will overbeat the mixture and have holes or tunnels in your fritters. This is very much like a thick muffin batter that you're going to French fry. It was interesting to me to discover when I was researching that food is called, when it's cooked like this, it's called frittered food. So you can fritter almost anything, and then you would say it's frittered. Probably ought to be always past tense, but at any rate, today we are frittering corn. Now, the heat should be in your electric skillet, the oil that you are using, or in your French fryer, and we're using a French fryer today, should be heated to 350 degrees. And by a tablespoon, rounding tablespoon, drop these into this hot fat. Make sure that your hot fat has had plenty of time to preheat. Another hint, certainly, for frittering food is to not overload your French fryer or your skillet, because you lower the heat of the oil and the food takes longer to cook, and as a result it absorbs more fat. So make sure that you don't overload your skillet or French fryer. I think for this particular case you can either use a very deep skillet or a French fryer, either one. But you have to have a minimum of 2 inches of fat. Now cook those about 2 or 3 minutes on each side. Bishop Hill was settled in 1848 by Swedish immigrants who were seeking religious freedom. It was a communal utopian community, and believe it or not, over the years, in America there have been approximately 450 of these utopian communities that began and did fail in the United States. These aren't quite done, but I'm going to show you what they look like when they're all finished. Look at them. They're as delicious as anything you've put in your mouth, and you can see how delicate and cake-like the fritter is when it's broken open. There's the corn, there's no holes, there's no tunnels. Now, you could serve these, of course, with maple syrup if you like. It's really a nice dish. Don't forget it. You're absolutely going to love this next recipe. it's rice pudding. And I must say, it's the very best rice pudding I've ever eaten. This particular recipe is always served by the Swedes at Christmas, but they also make it the year round, and so do I. Earlier, we have cooked in a double boiler, and make a note of this. We have cooked in a double boiler 1/2 cup of white grained rice and 1 cup of milk. And we've cooked that for 45 minutes. And as you can see, the rice has absorbed every bit of that milk. And the rest of the recipe is just a snap. In your mixer bowl, beat 3 eggs until frothy. Don't overbeat this, mind you, because you don't want too much air going into those eggs. And then we're going to add 2/3 cup of sugar and 2 teaspoons of vanilla. There, just a little bit more. Add 2 tablespoons of melted butter and 1/4 teaspoon of salt and 3 cups more of milk. Now get those proportions right, if you will. 1 cup went into the rice to cook it in the double boiler, and 3 cups then goes into the custard. Then blend this just briefly so you don't have any bubbles. And pour this over the rice. Now the thing is, don't mix this in. And when the rice is finished baking, the rice will remain on the bottom, and you're going to have this exquisite custard on top. Now over the top of this, drift on quite a bit of cinnamon, because that's going to give it a lovely color as well as flavor. Now bake this in a pan of hot water at 375 degrees for 50 to 60 minutes. There it is. So I want you to look at what it looks like when it's finished. Isn't this stunning? And we're going to finish it up with fruit sauces so you can see what it looks like. I almost hate to cut into this, it's so pretty. There we are. Put it in a sherbet dish because the sauce is rather thin, as you're going to see. Now we'll have a little more of this cinnamon on top. So it's all right. And then this is the fruit juice, which is actually grape juice that has been thickened with a little bit of the cornstarch. Now another fruit that they use would be called lingonberries. And if you remember from our visit to the Swedish deli, Mr. Wickstrom had some lingonberries there that he showed us. This also might be served with the rice pudding. They're very similar to the American cranberries, but do come from Scandinavia. It's an interesting dish. Another recipe from Bishop Hill is Janson's Temptation. It's a very well-flavored baked potato dish that's been baked with cream and anchovies. I'm going to move this aside and get my other things over here, ready to go. And I know you're going to like it, and I don't want you to be horrified when I say anchovies, because it's perfectly all right. We begin by sautéing in 3 tablespoons of butter 2 medium onions that are chopped and rather finely, and let them cook until they're golden brown. That gives us some flavor. And then on the stove, scald together 1 cup of half and half cream and 1 tin of mashed anchovies. And I want to talk about anchovies a little bit. These are tiny filleted fish. You buy them in cans like this. And they're packed in oil, and they're very salty, and you can see what they look like. These happen to be the fillets. Sometimes you can buy them rolled, and they have capers in the center. You use them interchangeably, actually. They're used on pizzas, and you certainly have them in Greek salads, and you couldn't make a Caesar salad without an anchovy. Now, don't be so prejudiced about anchovies. And what we're going to do here is alternately layer 5 potatoes that have been peeled and arranged, peeled and cut, arranged like a French fry. These are a little bit thicker than McDonald's, but that's all right. And we're going to layer that with the onions. So here we are. Whoops, there we went on the floor. Well, the dog will have to eat it. Okay, and we're going to add about half of the onions over the top of this and scatter fairly evenly. The milk's going to do some of that for you when you flood it. And then this is a very important part of this recipe, using coarsely ground black pepper for flavor, and be liberal with it. And then repeat with potatoes, like this. Finish it up with the onions. And I just, it's sort of, you know what this is? This is sort of a scalloped potato without any flour. It's a scalloped potato with anchovies. And the pepper again. More potatoes. And then we're ready to pour over the top the mixture that we prepared earlier, which was 1 cup of half and half, and the mashed anchovies. Now, it might be necessary for you to add a little more cream, depending on the size of dish you've used. It's best if it just comes to the top of the potatoes, and that's a very personal thing that you're going to have to decide for yourself. Certainly more cream never hurt anybody. And I'm going to add just a little bit more here. This recipe is called Janson's Temptation because Eric Janson, the leader of Bishop Hill, was very fond of this dish. I found it so interesting that many of the people living there today are descendants of those original settlers. And the community has begun a restoration of that original settlement. No small job, believe me. Incidentally, you bake this at 350 degrees for 1 hour and 30 minutes uncovered, or until the potatoes are tender and golden brown. It's certainly an unusual dish. It's a traditional smorgasbord offering and would be ideal for any buffet table because it's so very good, even served at room temperature. Let's go over all the delightful things we did today because the Swedish people, you know, deserve quite a bit of time when you consider the contributions they've made to cookery, for goodness sake. First of all, we have these superb Swedish meatballs. Don't they look delicious? There. They're making a comeback. But of course, you know, the Swedish never knew they'd gone. Thank goodness. You know, some food trends are sort of silly. And putting meatballs on the back burner was one of those. As I say, I'm glad the Swedes never knew that. These can be served either as an entree or put them in a chafing dish. And then, of course, we have these lovely fritters. They're almost ethereal, they're so light. Serve them at either brunch or dinner as a meat accompaniment, as you would a hush puppy with Southern food. And then we have the homey rice pudding with this great sauce. You know, sometimes an almond is added to the pudding, and according to the belief, the boy or girl who finds it in his or her dish will be the first in that family to marry. And then we have, at last, Janson's Temptation. It was a double recipe in this dish, incidentally. This potato dish is familiar to all Scandinavians, but more people should really know about it. Instead of having antique dishes today, I thought it would be fun to show you something a little bit different. This is Swedish embroidery, and it's truly exquisite. It's popular throughout Scandinavia. It's a form of drawn thread work. This altar cloth, and you can only see a very small portion of it, is an absolutely marvelous example of this art form, and that's what it really is, art. It's so intricate, it just literally takes your breath away. These two pillows show the range of style in the stitchery. This pale blue pillow is Swedish. Isn't that a gorgeous piece? And the larger one is Danish. And these bell pulls, which are a bit unusual, are created by doing counted stitches. The weave of the fabric is essential here because the threads of the material must be counted to do the embroidery. This is considered the very favorite form of stitchery in Scandinavia. These are all works of love, just like fine cooking is. So until next time, as a gut, eat good.
Major funding for Marcia Adams Heartland Cooking is provided by Maple Leaf Farms, a symbol for ducklings and frozen entrees. Chef quality you can count on. By Souder Woodworking, producers of ready-to-assemble furniture for the home and office. America's furniture craftsmen with more than a half-century of experience. By Marilat Industries, America's cabinet maker, committed to quality in a variety of kitchen and bath cabinetry styles.